Hi everybody, my name is Jenny. My channel is Senior Perspective. Take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button and let's get started talking about The Traitors, Episode 6.
Welcome to my castle. Amidst this world of bloodshed, I am your humble narrator. So step inside, stay a while in the company of the traitor.
All right, we are back with Episode 6 review, and oh my goodness, it was a good one. I knew it would be, and it is. And as I said on the last video, in my hotel room Thursday night, I am sitting there with popcorn and molasses cookies. Terrible. Terrible.
I don't like that. That's disgusting.
Just because that's all I had in the room. And instead of going to bed, I stayed up and I watched, and I was thrilled. And then I came home at the end of the whole weekend and rewatched it again to take notes. So off my notes, let's talk about it. All right, so it opens up at breakfast as it usually does. Kate's one of the first people down, and Dan asks her, "What do you think about coming back again, Kate?" Which confirms she was in season 1 as well. And Kate gives this response.
Kate, how's it feel to be back in the swing of things?
So weird, and why did I do this? But you know, I thrive when I'm miserable, so I feel like I'm gonna do well.
I think it's gonna be nice.
I thrive when I'm miserable. That just seems to match her personality so well. I would hate to thrive only when I'm miserable, but I think she does. She's spent her whole life as a stew in a chief stew on yachts, which is not that glamorous of a position. Very tight, small little beds to sleep in, and you're sharing that tiny little bunk quarter with somebody else, and you're working from morning till sundown every day. But she was good at her job when she did it. In the talking head, we have Phaedra reiterating that she didn't want to vote for Berkey, but that's what they did.
Walking into breakfast, I'm feeling frustrated. The choice to murder Berkey was not my decision. Dan wanted him gone because he's been hot on Dan's trail. I really adore Berkelicious. I think he's a sweet young man, and he's just so kind. But everybody's got to die.
So now we know for certain Berkey was given the death warrant, although he wouldn't have died because he has the shield. Oh, this is so bad for Dan, I can't even tell you. And really, Parvati. Peter came in so confident, so almost overconfident, cocky, that I started not liking him. I mean, I kind of started was not like, I loved his strategy and his gameplay, but now there's a little bit of attitude affiliated with it as he's getting a little bit of success in his game, and I don't like it. I don't like it at all. So everybody comes down to breakfast. Berkey doesn't show up. Peter's all excited because he knows Berkey had the shield, so if he's the last one, that means he's still around. Whereas Phaedra, Parvati, and Dan are thinking, we killed Berkey. And then there's a knock on the door. And sure enough, Berkey walks in, pulls out his shield, and says, "I had a shield. They tried to kill me, but I'm safe." The gig is up. The gig is up. Sorry, Dan. I don't see how Dan can get out of this one. In his talking head, he makes it sound like he's going to weasel his way out of this. But I haven't liked his gameplay all along. I think he's completely out of touch with how to play this game. Maybe it worked in Big Brother, but it's not working here. And they have been telling him to his face over and over again, "Dan, you need to speak up. Dan, you're on the hot seat. Dan, there's a target on your back." And then when he hears from somebody else that somebody was thinking about voting for him, he's like, "Why? I don't understand." I think he came in with a level of arrogance that affected his game. I have written in my notes here, "Dan, you deserve to be voted off for making such a stupid move. Go big or go home, you said. Well, bye-bye, you messed up. You're going home." It was such a dumb move. Didn't I say that on the last video? Dan, what are you doing? Just do the sure bet thing and then play and work your game. But what kind of threat is Berkey other than he said, "I'm going to vote for you"? Big deal. A lot of people vote for a lot of people. It was just dumb. It was dumb. And Dan knew it was a huge chance. If I were Parvati, I'd be so mad at Dan right now because her name is on the chopping block. Phaedra, she's just skating right through all this. And then Dan in his interview said, "This one's on me. I wanted to get out a big target." I don't know if he meant target. I wanted to get out a big target because does he mean a big threat? Because the target is on you, Dan. The target is who everybody's going for. That's the target. I mean, technically, everybody's got a target on them, but like the big target would be you, Dan, not Bergie. He's on nobody's radar. He's like one of those big fluffy dogs that everybody has now. That's what Bergie reminds me of. Bergie would be a good name for one of those dogs too. Labradoodle, Labrapoodle, Rabble, I don't know. Anyway. But then my other question in my notes here, on top of the fact that he felt like Bergie was a big target and had to take him out, don't completely understand that. But I also, right after that, wrote, why? Why? If you thought Bergie was a big target or a big threat or whatever the proper term is, why? Except that he said he was going to put your name down. But like 4 people voted for you, so why Bergie? I think his thinking is so clouded and he's caught up in his emotions. What has Bergie done except for do a good job in the graveyard challenge? That's the only contribution I've seen him give to the game. I haven't seen him come up with any original ideas. I haven't seen him strategize. That's not to say that he hasn't. We don't see everything. But if something good was going on, the cameras would show it. He's just there. And it was just that he specifically said to Dan, "I'm going to vote for you next time." So Dan is personally threatened. And he let that affect his game. Let's face it, Dan never acted like a faithful. So nobody thinks he's a faithful. He was so busy trying to play the big brother game in the traitor house that he didn't embrace what you need to do as a traitor to blend in and be a faithful. Take a look at Phaedra. She's doing it very well. So at the breakfast table, Peter shares his strategy with everybody. He says, "Last night I told 3 people who I thought might be traitors that I had the shield because I wanted to see if they would vote for somebody else. I thought that somebody was gunning for Bergie, i.e. Dan, without him coming out and saying Dan's name. And so I thought, I'll tell these people I have the shield and see if they go for Bergie, and they fell right into the trap. Yeah, they did, or yeah, he did. And I'm so disappointed in you, Parvati, for not talking him out of it. Why does Dan have so much influence? Is it just because they knew that he won Big Brother twice, which we find out in this episode. He never really did win it twice. He won it once, and then he was runner-up once. So at this point, I just thought, game over. 2/3 of the traitors are gone. Now everybody knows what's going on. Well, Sandra's catching up.
We leaked it to the people that we thought were the traitors.
Oh, who did you leak it to? Hold on, because I don't know. Who did you leak it to?
She makes me laugh. She's like picking up, oh, you told somebody. Who? Who'd you tell it to? Wait. I'm catching on. CT comes right out and says, you told me. And then just kind of brushes it off like, I don't know why. I'm not a traitor. And then Parvati jumps in and says, he told me it was Bergie too, but he told me to keep it in confidence, and I completely did. I didn't tell a soul. And then Dan, again, laying back, not doing anything aggressive, playing his laid back game, has to come out because 2 people already came out and said, and of course he knows Peter knows who he is, so he'll call him out. So Dan is forced to go, oh, he told me too, but I'm not a traitor. Bah. Weak. Damn, I'm so disappointed. It was not convincing. He looked guilty. In the talking head, Dan admits that he underestimated Peter because he was a bachelor and not a game player. big mistake. What makes you think just because you haven't been on a challenge game that you don't have the mind to figure out a challenge game? I find the arrogance of that insulting. I do. That Dan thinks only people who participate in challenge games are going to be able to win another challenge game. I've never been in a challenge game. I think I could do pretty well at this.
I don't know.
So Dan admits he now has to change up his gameplay immediately. Yeah, but a little too late, I think. It doesn't matter what Dan's going to do now. So many people are now convinced because for all of this time, he just kept laying low and doing nothing. It's too late. You can't wait until your back is pinned against the wall and then try to throw out ideas as desperation. No one's going to believe you anymore. It had to be part of the game. It had to be natural. It had to be part of the flow. It had to be you establishing relationships and having secret conversations. I don't know. This is the first time I've ever seen the show, and I'm just shocked at how poorly Dan's doing. And then Peter says something that seemed very observant, and I didn't notice it, but he said that when Bergie walked into the room, that Dan and Parvati had reactions to him coming in the room. CT had no reaction. But CT should have had a reaction because CT thought he was dead. So you'd think that CT should have been like, what? And so maybe they had overreactions, and so that's what he was reading. I mean, CT's non-reaction is kind of odd too. Unless somehow he knew that Bergie had the shield, so he expected him to come back, but we just didn't see any of that conversation happening. Peter whispers to somebody else that Parvati could not look at him throughout breakfast. So on top of the big reaction, I guess her lack of eye contact showed guilt to him. Dan so messed up by not getting rid of Peter. Totally underestimated him. So at this point after breakfast, Parvati takes Peter aside in the kitchen and talks to him. And Peter's like, okay, I really think you're a traitor. And Parvati's like, I think you're a traitor. Look at everything you're doing. You're really messing everything up. That's exactly what a traitor would do. And he just kind of smiled like, this isn't working on me. There's a little bit of arrogance, but it's also kind of funny. So Peter says to Parvati, give me something. Tell me like a strategy that you did that I don't know about, or a theory that you have that I might not know about. Like, what are you thinking? What is your gameplay? How can you prove that you are not a traitor? And Parvati just says, I don't have anything. I'm just doing the best I possibly can to figure out this game. Oh my gosh. If at that moment he was not convinced before that Parvati is a traitor, he should be now. Because that is such a Dan line. That's exactly what Dan would say. That's exactly what Dan's been saying. Parvati, that's not the way to go. Don't emulate Dan now. Oh no, I'm just sitting there going, what did she say? Make something up. Oh, and Peter does say to her, I'm trying to work with you, but you're not giving me anything. Yeah. So now Dan goes into the kitchen and he's talking to Peter. In his talking head interview, Dan said, oh, the time to be passive is in the past. I need to be aggressive now. Well, I'm really curious to see what this aggressive gameplay looks like, because he is going to have to pull a rabbit out of a hat to get out of this quandary he put himself in. It seems like you should be upping your gameplay and getting more aggressive when you notice people are hot on your trail, not after you're caught. Once you're caught, the gig is up. But we'll just see what happens this episode. Dan, I seem so desperate. This is how Dan handled it. He says, oh, I thought you told me because we were tight. But, it's okay. And Peter's not buying a lick of it. It's not working, especially because they never really were tight. Never once did they show a breakaway of Peter and Dan talking with each other. I mean, occasionally in a room of a bunch of people, but Peter has his alliance of 5 people, and Dan's not in it. Dan is always talking to the Traitors, or he's talking to Janelle because he knows Janelle. I've seen him talking with John. maybe even Sheree. That's about it. I don't really see him. I have seen him talking to Trishelle once, but that was this episode. That was in desperation to try to get votes going his way. So him throwing out, oh, I thought you shared that information with me because we were tight, just proves even more that's not true. And then he goes on to say, just know that if you vote me out, don't take it to heart when I say I'm a faithful. I won't be mad at you. And Peter just laughs. I really don't like Peter's arrogance in this episode. I really don't. But I mean, I gotta agree with him. The attempt at manipulating his emotions is just falling on deaf ears. What I don't understand, and maybe it's because there's rules involved that I don't completely understand, but I'm not getting, why is Dan not turning on Parvati and Parvati turning on Dan? Because that's what I would do at this point. The other person, I would just say, listen, and start coming up with stuff to show that, yeah, they're a traitor. I'm not, but they're a traitor. I mean, Parvati really should be, because Dan got her in this whole mess. I mean, I think there was a target on her back before this ever happened, but now there's a bigger one on her back because of this situation that happened, which is all Dan's doing, because Dan is the one that wanted to vote for Bergie. Parvati didn't want to. Parvati said, oh, Peter's trying to get us to vote a certain way. We need to vote for somebody inside the castle. And Dan didn't listen. Well, this brings us up to the challenge now. The challenge for this week is to build what are those called? A troubadour? Trebuchet. I think it's called a trebuchet. The thing that launches, a launcher thing. Isn't that called a trebuchet? Anyway, something very similar to that. If not that, I might be very close, but have a letter or two off. Anyway, it's like a launcher kind of thing. The kind of thing at pumpkin season. I live in the Midwest. You can see them, you throw pumpkins in them, and they see how far can you launch the pumpkin. Okay, so apparently it was a way to launch cannons in years gone by. And so they have to carry their cannonball from the castle all the way through a river, up a mountain, over, a long, long distance. And on the way, they have to collect all the pieces to assemble their launcher. I think it's also called a catapult, and I think they use the term catapult on the show, but there's a more formal name. I think it's trebuchet. Trebuchet. Okay, I'm sorry. I digress. We'll call it a catapult because I'm pretty sure that's the term that they used, because it would catapult things. So they collected all these pieces of wood and whatnot. They found like a sled, which was really just a huge piece of flat plywood with ropes to help them carry it up the hill, because the hill was all gravel and uneven. So there were no wheels on it. They just had to drag it across. Well, these pieces they needed to assemble the catapult were extremely heavy. This was a major workout for them. Along the way, there were these boxes that said ammo on them, and inside the ammo, they had cannonballs. Well, if you found one of those, you collect it, and it gave you a shot at maybe having a shield and being safe from being eliminated and killed that evening. So there were 5 boxes along the way, and of course, Peter's like, I'm definitely getting voted out tonight. I've been making a big mess and stirring the pot. I need to get one of these boxes and go for, only one person was actually going to get the shield, I guess, for that competition. So they went all the way up to the top. They had to assemble the catapult and launch the first bullet and do it in less than, 20 minutes time, 30 minutes time, something like that. And of course, they were like down to the last minute when they did it. Again, I don't know how much production is just letting them win all of these and coming up with fake times for how long things are taken. But nevertheless, they launched it. They get their money, 20 grand or something like that, added to the pot. And now everybody who had a box with a cannonball gets to launch theirs with the catapult to the same area where the bullseye is on the grass far away. The person who gets closest to the center is the person who gets the shield. So we go through. There's Parvati, Sandra, Trishelle, and Sheree all went first. First Parvati, and then Sandra, then Trishelle, and at that point Parvati was the closest to getting immunity. And then Sheree launches hers, and she beats Parvati. So Sheree's in the lead. There's only one more person to go, and it's Peter. And I'm thinking, oh man. And a lot of them were kind of shy of the target. It's where it first hits, not where it lands after it rolls, but where it first hits. So many of them were shy of the target. So I kept thinking, like, Peter's definitely going to hit that target or be closer to the other side of the target. But apparently the guy's kind of weak because his was the worst launch. His was the furthest shy on the grass, way shy of where the target was. So he didn't win. Sheree won. She gets immunity. She doesn't need it. Her name has never come up. I don't think it's ever even been written down. She's flying under the radar on this season. But she ends up with the shield. So in the cars, on the way back from where the catapult was, driving back to the castle, in Kate's car, I can't remember who was all sitting in there, but Kate's was sharing that she's suspecting Parvati as being a traitor. And the other people in the car are agreeing. Oh, I have written down here that Sheree agrees and admits that Parvati has been on her radar since week 1. In another car, we have Kevin. And Kevin says, do you think that Dan is still on the chopping block? Very sincerely. No, he's not on the chopping block. He's chopped up already. He's as good as dead. He's gone. MJ and Phaedra were also in that car. And they said, oh yes, he so is. And Kevin goes, yeah? He hasn't done anything though. Yes, Kevin. That's the point. He's not playing the game. He's trying. Oh, Kevin.
Bless his heart.
We have a new not sharpest knife in the drawer or not brightest bulb. Okay, moving on. So Dan is in the car with Parvati, Peter, and Trishelle, and he says that he knows he's on the chopping block for that night. And in the talking head interview with Dan, he says, even though Peter thinks he is 99.9% sure that I'm the traitor, I won't quit. If I can present a decent argument to him and convince everyone, I have a chance. I guess so. I don't know how you're going to do it, Dan. But I'll believe you're the best game player and all if you can get yourself out of this one. So in a side room, we have back at the castle. Now they're back at the castle. They change. They're getting dinner. They have it on their plates. They're sitting in chairs and couches and that with the plate on their lap and eating. And in one room is Sandra, Bergie, Sheree, and John, as well as Peter. And they're all starting to talk game strategy. And so Peter goes, just a minute, let me go close the door. He goes to close the door, and Parvati is walking down the hall with her plate of food ready to go into that room to join them. And he's like, oh, sorry, just a minute. We're going to be talking. And he closes the door on her. I think this is where that arrogance really bugs me again. I mean, do they not have the whole rest of the day where they can have conversations with each other? Was that really necessary to say, no, you can't eat with us? It felt very elementary school. So the group is all talking in the room. They all agree that Parvati is definitely a traitor and most likely Dan too. They come to a consensus and Peter says, okay, he gets up and he leaves and he calls for Parvati to go ahead and come to the room, of which she has no plate with her anymore. So this had gone on for a while because she had completed her dinner in another room with other people. Later on, we have Dan taking Peter aside and saying he's 100% sure that he knows who at least one of the traitors definitely is. 100% sure. He said he's going to plead his case tonight at the round table and that he's going to take a shot against one person. Now, I can't think of enough stuff that he could create against other people. So I'm like 99.9% sure he's going after Parvati at this time, especially since clearly her name is on the chopping block. Or does Dan even know that? I don't know. So we get to the round table now. It's evening, we're at the round table. Nobody's saying a word, so Dan finally speaks up and he's like, okay, I have been following and watching one person ever since day one, and I'm convinced that they are the traitor. And I'm thinking, okay, here he goes. Going to throw Parvati under the bus, and then she's going to try to throw him under the bus, and it's going to be split votes, and we're going to see who comes out at the end. This is what Dan says. He said, we need to find somebody who's very suspicious. So I was looking for suspicious activities. Well, first of all, who's been flying under the radar never had their name written down? Parvati, Bergie, Sheree, Sandra, and Phaedra. Which I think is interesting because I thought MJ never. Who wrote MJ's name down ever? I can't ever remember somebody writing MJ's name because why would you write MJ's name down? MJ is like Sheree, completely under the radar, doesn't seem to really be strategizing, just going with the flow, a sheep, a follower, a Bergie. So then Dan says, okay, so that narrowed it down to the Traitors, one of those people. So then we have to look and see who voted weird. I'm like, okay. He said, Sandra's vote, she's always been able to explain herself. Sheree had one weird vote, but she explained it and kind of talked it away. He said, Bergie, he just goes with the crowd. He got that right. You had to give Dan kudos for that. Bergie. Yeah. I mean, Bergie might be a smart person. We're not seeing it, but we know Kevin's not. And then he goes, so that leaves Parvati and Phaedra, which narrowing it down to the two of them, I thought was ballsy. I'm like, Dan, what are you doing? He's like deciding if I go out, I'm going to sabotage the rest of my traitors for whatever reason. It's almost like that, well, if I can't win, I don't want them to win either. That seems to be what's going on. This is where I really started to go from, I originally kind of liked Dan. I mean, I didn't know him, but I was just rooting for Traitors, to, what are you doing, Dan? To, Dan, I don't like anything that you're doing here. To now,
I really don't like you.
I am not liking what you're doing here. The selfishness of trying to take out his other traitors with him just irks me. He goes on to say, Parvati had a strange vote for Kevin, but then she explained it. So that leaves Phaedra. What? What is he doing? He has the perfect opportunity to throw Parvati under the bus. Instead, he's going to create something out of nothing, which is really nothing out of nothing. And here's what he says. He said she had a vote that was unexplained. She voted for Ekin-Su, which I remember was justified at the time. It didn't seem to come out of left field, but he said that it was unjustified. And then he goes on to say, and then Ekin-Su gets voted out and killed by the Traitors that night. So that's very suspicious. So his first suspicion of Phaedra is simply that nobody's written her name down. Then it's that she voted for Ekin-Su, which was odd, followed by the fact that Ekin-Su was killed that next day. And finally, what makes Phaedra suspicious is her reactions at breakfast, because he claims he's been watching her. He said when Marcus got voted out, she got up and went over to Larsa and was comforting her and saying, it's okay, that's all right. That was suspicious. He said when Tamara got voted out, that she made the announcements, oh Lordy, they're coming after the housewives. And that was suspicious. Was it? And then Bergie got voted out, and she said, oh no, not my Bergie-licious. Again, this is the hill he's going to die on. Couldn't have made a bigger mistake than to go for Phaedra, especially when he has Parvati served to him on a silver platter. And he ignores that and goes after Phaedra. Again, it's his arrogance, because he thinks he's going to be able to sway everybody. So he either one is a complete a-hole and he's just trying to blow it all up and get rid of all the traitors and see to it that Phaedra doesn't win this game out of pure jealousy, because she's a housewife and she's doing better than him. And he doesn't think that if you're not a challenge game winner, that you can't win at these things. Wrong, Dan. Or two, he has a level of arrogance that's so high that he's convinced he's going to talk everybody into this and get rid of her. Neither of them are good characteristics. I don't know. It doesn't seem that arrogance and being an a-hole, either one of them are great characteristics, but it doesn't seem like either one of those are going to help you succeed in the game. Maybe in some games they get you further along, but Dan has no social game whatsoever. And I think of Big Brother as being a social game, yet I can't see how the man won it. Not if he played like this. So then we have Phaedra's reaction to him, which is, "You've been watching me? You've been watching me from day one?" Oh, Dan, you have no idea what you're getting into. Dan has not watched The Real Housewives of Atlanta back in the day when Phaedra was there. Phaedra has a tongue that can come at you. She is a lawyer and just somebody with an eloquence of speaking, an ability to come up with quips and comebacks that's bar none. So Dan, again, is misreading people and thinking he's smarter than he is. After Phaedra said that, John's like, yeah. He looked like he melted down into like a 6-year-old little boy. It's like, oh, yeah, I'm watching you. I think he had no idea what to expect at this point, and he could tell just from her tone of voice and the way she was looking at him that this might not go as he expected.
So you've been watching me from day one?
Yeah.
If he thought Phaedra was just going to lay down and take it, he was wrong. Dan says no one's ever written your name down. Why do you think that is? And Phaedra's like, nobody's written a lot of people's names down. That doesn't mean they're a traitor. Good point, Phaedra. Dan said, well, what about the Ekin-Su vote? And she said, I wrote down Ekin-Su's name because she was changing her story in regard to Janelle, so I couldn't trust her. Everybody knows that. Which is really funny because if you know Phaedra from back in the day, she always goes, everybody knows. When her talking head interviews, she used to go, everybody knows he's a traitor. Everybody knows. It's just how she would begin everything. So this is the first time I've heard her say it at all on this series, so it made me laugh out loud to hear her say, everybody knows that. Okay, Dan, 2 for 2. Phaedra's shooting you down. Dan goes on, and he says, well, what about the breakfast murder reactions? Which I think is his weakest argument. He should have started with that one. Phaedra goes, Bergie, and Kate goes, not my Bergie-licious? That was problematic for you, Dan? Kate saying it like it is.
Murder reactions every time.
What breakfast murder reactions?
The Bergie.
Not my burgalicious was problematic for you.
He says, Marcus? She said, because I consoled my fellow housewife after her boyfriend got sent home? That was suspicious? And Kate just interrupts again and goes, I don't understand any of this. None of this makes any sense. What is the logic behind this? Dan says to Kate, the logic is it's all a little bit extra. And Kate right away comes back with, have you seen her?
Yeah.
What's the logic behind that?
The logic behind me is that it's always like a little bit extra. Like,
Have you seen her?
that's true.
Phaedra's the epitome of extra. The way she speaks, the way she carries herself, the way she dresses, the amount of makeup, extra head to toe. And Dan had to concede and he goes, yeah, that's a good point. I can't argue with you there. Phaedra replies, oh, I'm very extra, baby. I do too much because you do too little. She goes on to say, but tonight you're doing way too much because you know you're getting ready to be banished. All right, I wrote out what Phaedra said here because it was so much and I will get a copyright strike if I try to put it on. This is what Phaedra goes on to say. It was just eloquent. Didn't pause. This is Phaedra, completely unprepared for this, right? She had no idea Dan was going to throw her under the bus. I do too much because you do too little. But tonight, you're doing way too much because you know that you're getting ready to be banished. You're trying to put the heat on me, which is a crock of BS. You've won Big Brother, Not once, but twice. And then Dan corrects her and says, almost twice. She said, either way, you have knowledge of this game. If there were really a mastermind, it sure wouldn't be a dolled up housewife baby. That would not be it. Let's not forget, Bergilicious voted for you last night, so obviously you tried to kill him. Dan said, well, don't you think that would be a little too obvious? And Phaedra says, but why would I want him out? I don't have any problems with Bergie. And Dan said, I didn't say you wanted him out. And Phaedra said, but you're saying I'm the killer, which means she would want him out, right? Yes. Bergie joins in here and says, if Phaedra was a traitor and thinking long game, she'd keep me around because she knows that I trust her. Dan said, okay, that's a fair defense. Dan is just getting beaten down. This is the worst. This is the worst attempt at defending himself and pleading his case. This is what he's been thinking all this time in the game as he's come up with somebody. I mean, I think he just goes to bed at night. You see Peter with his little notebook there, like studying. And he even admitted he's thinking about this 24/7. I don't think Dan was. I think he thought he'd skate through and win. Phaedra goes on to say, but no one trusts you, darling. And I didn't know anything about who had those shields. You did. So Peter chimes in at this time and said, I told Dan, Parvati, and CT. So one of you, for sure, is a traitor. He adds, I don't think CT is. And he says, but I do suspect you too. He said, I believe this is my last night here in the castle because I've been so loud and vocal and bold about all of this. So I am most likely going to be murdered tonight. And if I am, let that be proof that Dan and Parvati are traitors. Parvati, trying to defend herself, which is a good defense, points out that there is a very strong clique in this house. And if you're not in Peter's group, you're not part of the clique, and you're going to be either murdered or banished. That was a good defense because there's more people out of Peter's clique than in Peter's clique. So this will start to get the other people to maybe, if they're thinking straight, band together and start getting out the people in Peter's group. So now it's time to vote. Every single person votes for Dan, except for Dan, of course, who votes for Phaedra. And nobody else believed him whatsoever. And Peter. Peter voted for Parvati because he said Parvati is most likely not going to be banished tonight. He believes that there were enough votes going for Dan, so he wanted to put Parvati's name out there so that after he's murdered tonight, everybody remembers that she's a traitor too. He's leaving swinging for the fences as well. As they were going around and showing the names, John, of course, let me backtrack. Every time they show the name, they also have to say why. I voted for so-and-so, and this is why. So John is taking it very seriously. Watch this.
My vote is for Dan. I listened intently to you, Dan, tonight, and your deflection was on to Phaedra. And that case was comprehensively rebutted. Treachery deserves to be punished.
I'm watching it and I'm getting uncomfortable.
By banishment. Banishment, my dear friend, should be your fate tonight. This guy is the silent slaughterer, and that's the sum of it.
Yes.
Oh, we're not in Parliament. It's a game. He is really taking it seriously. Boy, the way some of these players are getting into it. Well, Dan is banished from the game. He goes and he walks to the circle of truth where you have to say whether you're a traitor or a faithful. And he says, listen, I have never had anybody in 2 seasons of Big Brother ever write my name down. And tonight, just about everybody wrote my name down. And I'm here to tell you, unfortunately for me, I am a traitor. And then everyone cheers. He smiles and he waves and he leaves. And I like that. That's the one thing I did enjoy, is because some people are really, really getting into this, and clearly everybody else was going to smile and cheer on that, but he smiles and he waves too, whereas like I felt like he was really taking it very personal. And at the very end, he was able to go, all right, you got me. So everyone's smiling, high-fiving. Let's go celebrate. We got woo! They do a talking head interview with Trishelle, who has a brilliant summary of what went down at the round table.
At that point, he called out Phaedra. I think that he knew that we needed to be fed a traitor, and I think that Phaedra is a traitor, and no one's even suspecting it.
Let's go celebrate.
So Dan throwing Phaedra under the bus like this, and maybe that was his plan all along. I don't know. I don't know how selfish or egotistical or bitter or embarrassed maybe that somebody who is just a housewife or somebody who's a bachelor can outplay him. So we have Peter and his little clique again in a room with the door closed afterwards, discussing strategy. And in the kitchen is everybody else, which is approximately, I don't know, maybe 7 females plus CT. And Sandra says, shall we go crush the meeting of the most faithful 5? And they all walk into the room.
What's going on in here?
And pretty much try to call them out on a Parvati, it does anyway. But this is where I wonder, are Sandra and them, or maybe even Parvati, starting to think, let's try to get them. Let's knock all them out and refocus attentions away from traitors, or convince that we think there's traitors in there that are running this game. We need to vote some people from that room out. That would be a good move on Parvati and Phaedra's part, because none of them are traitors in there. So starting to knock them all off would be brilliant. So now it's the end of the episode, and they're at the round circle at the building that's called the Turret, or that location is called the Turret. I finally wrote it down. I keep forgetting to write down the name of it. So they're at the Turret with their cloaks in the dead of night. And Phaedra and Parvati have to now decide who are they going to murder. As, of course, they have Peter's name on the table and they're discussing the pros and cons of that, there's a knock on the door. And Alan Cumming walks in. There's another twist. They are down one person, and he said, according to the rules of the game. So I don't know if all of the players knew this already, if this is what happened last season, if these are new rules for this season, I'm not sure. But he says, according to the rules of the game, you have the opportunity to recruit another traitor. Now, again, remember, when you recruit a traitor and offer them the opportunity to be a traitor, they can deny it. He said, but
what?
You can only do one thing. Either murder somebody tonight or try to recruit. So if you try to recruit somebody and they say no, you, 1, have not recruited another traitor, and 2, have not murdered anybody. So it's sort of a double whammy against you. What are you going to do?
This is getting good.
Parvati is playing a little bit of Dan's game, but I understand it more at this point. And she wants to roll the dice and recruit Peter. Not a bad idea, just because he is the brilliant mastermind of this game. And he's totally onto Parvati. She's going to get voted out next one anyway. So Phaedra is like, is Phaedra going to go along with it or is she not? But Phaedra just basically says, I don't know if we can trust Peter. Which I don't know exactly what that means. Does that mean that they bring him in as a traitor, but he doesn't really act like a traitor? He shares information with the faithfuls. Is he allowed to do that? I don't know. I'm very curious about that. But I kept thinking, like, Peter's running this game so well right now that I could see him saying no. I'm going to stay a faithful because I know who's the next one to get out. So then we will get 2 traitors out. So Parvati convinces Phaedra by telling him, I just think it would be great to recruit him and make him have to turn on his clique of people and murder them one by one. And so Phaedra's like, all right, I'll follow along. Phaedra's really only made one killing decision, and that was because they felt bad for her. Other than that, she's been kind of riding the coattails of what Dan and Parvati have wanted. Parvati confirms with Phaedra, though. She's like, are you good with this?
The crazy bachelor pilot.
We really do. Are you good with that? Because you've had a tough day, too.
Because you had a bad day today, too, after everything that just happened with Dan. And Phaedra says this.
I have definitely had a tough day, but you're on your deathbed. I'm walking into the hospital. You're in the ICU, baby. You're about to flatline, so do what you want to do. I'm gonna follow.
Well put, Phaedra. You're all in trouble, but Parvati, she's on life support, so go ahead, take your shot.
Let's just light this place on fire.
Well, light it on fire, Parvati.
Let the games begin.
Peter goes to the room, sees the note on the chair, looks defeated, goes to sit down to read it because obviously he thinks it's "the traitors have killed you" note, and he opens it up and it says, "We are requesting to recruit you as a traitor." He's thinking about it.
This is the smartest move for the traitors to do right now. There's no way that anyone would suspect me being one right now.
And he has a good point. He said, "My goal is to get as far as in this game as possible, ideally to win it. If I don't accept their invitation to be a traitor, I'm next to get voted out."
Everything about me is win this game, win this game. And if I don't take this, like, I don't see how they don't murder me.
The war has started.
So in order to continue in this game, the best thing to do would be to accept the traitors because nobody would suspect them as being a traitor. At least not yet. Unless Alan announces somebody else got recruited as a traitor, and right away people might say, oh, well, maybe they tried to get Peter. I don't know. I don't know how it's going down, but I love that twist, and I love how it ended. This is the second week in a row, maybe the third. Maybe the third week in a row. It is a third week. It's a third week in a row where at the end of the episode, I was like, I wish I could binge this. I want to see the next episode. I do not want to wait a whole nother week. It was good. This was good. And I am very, very excited for Thursday night. I am very excited to see episode 7. I wonder how many episodes are going to be all in total. Do they literally go, I mean, I don't know how it ends. I don't know how. I'm just following this for the first time and am very giddy excited about how this is all going.
And I'm just very new at all this.
Okay, I will see you next week with my review of episode 7 after we find out if Peter indeed accepts the invitation to be a traitor or if he denies them, which would mean bye-bye Parvati. See you next week. Bye, y'all.